Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another session of Toward a Quality of Life, brought to you by myself in cooperation with BNN TV here at the Roxbury studio. Tonight I'm going to be addressing some kinds of ideas and understandings around the situation of the children amongst us, the teenagers amongst us, and persons who are in the so-called younger generations, with whom we perhaps have too little understanding and who perhaps in a fast world, in a technological world, have become something so unlike anything we know about, especially if we are in the so-called middle age, and really unlike anything people who are even older can relate to. I'll try to impart some sense of where we stand and what kind of substance we have to get a feel for to mix it up and know how we are and who we are and what's going on with us. I'll begin by thinking right offhand about piercing, putting the little metal objects in the eyebrow, in the tongue, in the nose, some in the genitals, on the nipples of the body, etc. Some in what would seem to many of us very uncomfortable places. Piercing as an act. I'm not going to try to describe what piercing means, but you can understand if this is not something you've ever had an inclination to do or understand that this is something that of course means that life is not so easy, that life is pretty hard, and that I can take pain, and it's symbolic. Even if people aren't thinking of this, when they go to get piercing, it's not exactly like getting a blue ribbon or a nice soft blanket or even swallowing a live fish as people used to do way long ago. It's quite a bit more severe and unkind an act to do to oneself, and a kind of unkind, abrasive kind of symbol, if you will, which reflects an essence of what is going on in life. Secondly, I'll also talk a little bit about high school and what high school periods of life can be like, and I say a lot of this from personal experience and vicarious experience as well. High school is a very grueling, demeaning, difficult, anxiety-producing, stress-producing, hurt-producing time for many people. And I know from my own personal experience, I was in a high school where there were several cliques in which sports ruled the day. Intellect was not favored whatsoever. In fact, it ranked bottom of the list. And people certainly had extremely strict in and out groups. And it was very difficult to understand what it was all about and why people were like this and why persons were persecuted or not persecuted. But it was a very derogating, mean, cruel place. And that is how high school can be. So high school is a very difficult situation. And you get that kind of a situation from the kids being the very product of adults who perhaps have things about them that produce this kind of net result to younger persons in a high school kind of situation. It does not come out of a vacuum. It comes in the context of whole human life. Now, high school and adolescence and early 20s and young teens is, and even sooner these days, is a time to figure out how you're going to live. And today, of course, many kids who are, so to speak, well-adjusted and don't seem to be doing some of the things that we consider more radical and certainly off limits and far astray. Some teens are well aware of the need to get money and to get it in a very serious way and to conform themselves, to shape themselves into some kind of corporate or semi-corporate way of proceeding to move. There's no longer, what I'm saying, this period of searching and taking time out and trying to find oneself. No, many more are heading lockstep, even while they are young and even while they have teenage ideas, are heading lockstep into the way a marketed future requires one to be. Yet the youngness and the need to stretch one's wings and to feel oneself still is there underneath it all. There are so many pressures, and the time is very compressed now. And like I said, younger and younger people are having to figure out how they're going to get by and how they're going to move ahead in this world, and have to know a lot more sophisticated adult kind of things at an earlier age, including our very little children. Now, I'm next thinking about rock groups as environmental kinds of essences and representations of what's going on with the young people, because of course now there's so much discussion about them in the media, pointing to them. But however, for the most part, yet today, a lot of music, especially rock music, alternative music, is a representation of some of the things people are feeling, the kind of sense that they have, and it's put to music, it's put to lyrics. I'm thinking of very popular groups like Korn that are talking, I'm not that familiar with them, but certainly about alienation and about all not being well and not feeling right. And I know their latest video has a bullet that goes through many objects, piercing and shattering along the way. We have the famous Kurt Cobain of Nirvana, who poignantly made the song that was so famous called Feels Like Teen Spirit, shouting, "Here we are now, entertain us." In other words, you brought us into this world. Here we are, we're your teens, we're looking at you. What kind of a world did you bring us into? What is this place all about? What's in it for us? Here we are now, entertain us. And you don't know, and the suffering is so severe, as is the suffering of his wife, explained in her music. Someday you're going to ache like I ache, said in a way that shows a searing, numbing, severe kind of existential, experiential pain experienced. Well, and what accommodation do we have for our children, I ask you? Next we have, of course, the much maligned Marilyn Manson, and I admit to the average observer he can look very far out and weird, and I know not all that much about him either, but even he is telling things that are sort of crawling out of his skin, that he has a need to communicate and say and try to work his way through and involve people with. And I know his once he became extremely big, as he is now, he put out a song called "We're All Freaks Now" in the Dope Show, meaning, of course, that there is so much drug culture around, and he made it to the Hall of Fame, elected to be one of those freaks in some of the biggest dope shows going. He also has said recently in a little interview I saw that his parents are not divorced, that he talks with them every day by phone, and that perhaps his family is dysfunctional because he's one of the very few people he knows whose parents are not divorced. And he also calls happiness a mental disorder, meaning that happiness is not something plausible or nothing that he knows in his experience, and not a relevant feature, and not that one would have to be sad or depressed, but happiness just doesn't ring a bell. Then we have groups like Joy Division in the 80s, one of whom committed suicide. We have Morrissey from the Smiths, a very popular group in the 80s. moaning about angst and existential kind of enemies and being in psychological hinterlands. We have the very early Mick Jagger saying, I can't get no satisfaction and I try. A man comes on and tells me how white my shirts can be, but he can't be a man because he doesn't smoke the same cigarettes as me. In other words, I'm being marketed to death and I can't get no satisfaction. No, no, no. We have pain, not the pain of financial deprivation, though sometimes we have the pain of enemy and the pain of a world without love, a pain of daisy cutter bombs, a pain of cluster bombs, a pain of spent uranium in the tips of missiles. We have Rage Against the Machine, another very popular group, very angry, as are many songs you can tune into saying, we're angry and don't tell us to be another way. So people are saying life is wrong in music frequently, some of it, that is not just the pop, and that marketing exploiting us is wrong, and that killing the environment is wrong, and that social inequity, though very hard admittedly to do something about, social inequity is wrong. We have sitcoms that have as their material one-upsmanship, constant ridicule of each other. Every line is a one-up ridicule of the next person. Facetious, poking fun, ridiculing. We have Kiss early on telling the kids to tie your mother down. Some people would be appalled, but they were saying, turn things upside down. We don't accept authority the way it is. Kids in revolt. Kids today aren't even in revolt as much as they might have been before. They're much more conformed in spite of this corrosion that people may sense that they are representing in ways that they present their artistic sides. We had the Dead Kennedys and No Future and saying kill the poor because that's essentially what you do. We had them in the 80s. And we had George Clinton saying fantasy is reality many years ago. And isn't that the truth, that the reality with the media and the way the children are being brought up, fantasy is reality in the world today. I also did a show called Youth from Mars that I may rerun sometime, talking to some of these so-called young people with these ideas that we cannot identify with if we're older. So life is unsatisfying in many, many cases. It's unfun. Where's the fun? Having to spend a lot of money buying a product is not really fun. Where's the conviviality, the camaraderie, the hanging out, the chilling, the just letting go and spending some time searching, just having fun? Young children and even not so young children need this kind of developmental period. We're in a world of space technology. We're in a world where the environment is in severe trouble. The future is not in the future. The future is now. The future is done. And we need some food for the soul. Now, what about daycare? What about starting our children off very soon after birthing them frequently in daycare, where they can only be one of many processed, having their clothes taken care of, their diapers taken care of, their food taken care of on a schedule, being walked, being brought back, being perhaps taught things. Daycare, what role does daycare play in the outcome in some of the ways and coldnesses and new kinds of behaviors and beings that we are seeing in our children? And also, you know, care. Parents care, certainly they do, very much, but care in ideas, in the mind and in the heart, just like that, when one is really not present, can never be the same as care in action. Minute to minute interchange for no reason except to just be with people, just for that reason in and of itself. Now, some people, of course, go right to the Bible, want to talk about what's written in the Bible, a return to biblical ideas, a return to family values, a return, and some people are blaming gun laws, which surely guns are not good for us to be having, especially the automatic and semi-automatic weapons. However, truly, like some people say, even though that must be taken care of, None of these will answer the malaise and the stench and the unsatisfyingness and discontent in young people. We can't just make people or try to make people into goody-goodies, make them conform into that. Never drink, never smoke, never swear, never stay out late, make them have curfews, even when so many of them must work late on their jobs to make some money. Never have premarital sex, even though I don't favor that they would do that. Never rebel, and everything they say or do to bust out is an offense. Oh, now there's some people calling, we've got to curtail things even more. And we have schools now supported or chartered and funded by corporations, and the schools are training kids into conformity with being able to fit into a corporate job. We have we can't make the people and the children into drones, workaday drones, although we're doing a good job of that, clones. And this is what doesn't sit well. Corporate automatons, where everything is a crime and creativity and all spontaneity is lost. We can't live by someone else's idea of how we should live. And we can't be programmed to be what we're supposed to be, but that is what's going on. Instead of teaching and people learning truly and developing and experiencing into unique kinds of ways, there is programming going on from the multiple influences that impinge on human life. The true responsibility in human life is to figure out how we live for ourselves. That responsibility is every person's responsibility to him or herself and his or hers alone. And personally, there's an awful lot, in my opinion, to be discontented about, to be angry about. I have, hopefully, no use for hate. I certainly don't care for violence. In fact, it bores me, and if I'm forced to watch it, it can upset me, but it's also very boring to see explosions and so forth. So even though I might be angry, which I am, and I feel I experience the discontent and the enemy and so forth, I don't feel that I have to lash out or strike out at someone. Instead, I'm always talking to you and just generally being on a different wavelength altogether, even while I experience, some of the same lack of, shall we say, enthusiasm for the way things are. Now, in the Bible, people say that God tells us this, that, and the other thing of how to live. And I dare anyone to know God and to know what God tells us. Have a line to God and be able to tell us through the Bible or otherwise. Just for the sake of argument, I ask you, did God tell us to make computers, to separate our children into daycares, to put our seniors into nursing homes, to wilt away, to drill into the skulls of animals in research, to dirty the water supply, to use spent uranium in missiles, to cut down the redwoods and the old forests, to genetically engineer tomatoes, to honor sneakers, to build whole expensive buildings and podiums, to sneakers and running gear and sports athletic gear. Did God tell us to do that? Did he tell us to squash animals in the highway, to not be with the children we've procreated? And what are the moral dilemmas? If you touch yourself or have someone touch you willingly and wantingly in private, is that a moral dilemma, or is everything I'm previously trying to refer to where the tide is tilted of necessity to be the dilemmas and the seas of muck of our time? Is the bombing and the kind of bombs we devise and keep on making more deadly and derangedly, are those the dilemmas of our times? Now, when you have a child who is not in close, easy communion with significant others on a steady, repeated basis, the same people all the time, when you have a child who is in a lot of times on his own, including little kids brought to daycare, having to stand there and wait till it's their turn, till somebody gets around to them to take care of taking their clothes off or do whatever, helpless in many instances to the tasks before them, having to know how to survive functionally to a great degree on their own. When you have children in these circumstances and the so-called latchkey situations, the television, the video games, and the peers are going to have phenomenal, even though they have phenomenal influence on children that are grounded in the midst of significant others. They will have exponentially more influence and penetration from some of these media and contingencies that I'm going to describe further. And before I do that, I'd also like to say that kids of all ages need to play. I think I said that before, but I'll repeat it, and especially the young ones. They should not be cooped up. They need lots of time to explore, and they don't so much need things to train their mind as to have the space with supervision to roam and explore and find out things and come up with creative and imaginative things on their own, instead of being programmed like programs such as Teletubbies for our very, very young children, where the mind, if we create these walking, talking things that just do as they are programmed, do not be surprised. Of course, children are highly impressionable, and there's no balance in their brain when they've not had an experience of an integrating nature. Their life is not integrated, so they haven't got the tools maturationally to figure out and have a sense of perspective and judgment, and on top of that, they're out there on their own, compoundedly, with kinds of decisions or contingencies that they shouldn't have to be facing, that they should have a lot of leadership in and guidance in moment to moment, and just a general rapport and repertoire for whatever comes up, not just problems, for anything. Now, the food for thought and action in the children's lives pretty much can be said to be media as the only true input. Our children are swept up in it, as are we as adults, and there are extremely few meaningful inputs in children's brains during the course of the day. They're processed, and pieces of so-called meaningful quality things with people who so-called care about them are too fast, too short, too few, and they're fractionated, they're fragmented, they're just pieces. They're not consistent, they're not the experience you can count on and live and grow into and grow with. For example, too, children often have many nannies, if they have nannies, or daycare persons in the course of a short period. I was speaking with one nanny with about a couple of 7-year-old children who was about the 4th or 5th nanny for these children, and who, though very educated and nice and polite, kept her emotions at bay, she explained to me, because she's had difficult experiences separating in previous situations and with parents and so on, and it's more of a perfunctory task where neither side can get really involved in a depth sort of way, the kind of depth that grows perspective, that grows judgment, that grows empathy, that grows knowing better, that grows, if you will, morality. So our children are processed. And our schools are institutions. That's what they are, institutions. And as bad a name as that word is, schools are institutions. In fact, some of them look like prisons to me. And not only are our children processed, but we're processed, customers are processed, voters are processed, citizens are processed at City Hall in Boston. Humans are processed, for example, in transportation, in hospitals, and we are living en masse in assembly, and we are having cumulatively, collectively, we are having in this modern, fast, futuristic, technological time, we are in the midst of an identity crisis. We determine who we are, not by where we live and whose children we are and who our families are and what we stand for and what we're like as personalities. We determine each other by our fingerprints, by IDs, and by DNA. And we conform to inflexible rules, or we try to. Our stress quotients are very high because the human is a very stochastic system. It's an ever-changing, moment-to-moment system that can't be fit into a square box. And yet we must fit into patterns that don't fit the human psyche and don't fit the human repertoire. So we have a lot of stress, a great gap between us and the contingencies that we're forced to fit. But we try, and the idea is to conform to inflexible rules, which of course dampens individuality. And in this modern life, one has to fit the system doesn't have to fit the person. Now look at telephone menus. These are all things contributing to how we end up as people. You might have to listen to 4, 5, 6, 7 directories that you have absolutely no need to hear, and then still punch some more and maybe still never get to where you need to go or get a voicemail, instead of having a human answer and direct everybody human to human in a split second with the efficiency and humanity and personalization that is required for good human life. I call it taxing my brain on things insane. I call it, as many do, dehumanizing, dehumanization. How about the artificial voice of a famous actor that greets you when you do use any AT&T service of operator or information? You have to go through that. And many seniors, I'm told, always make a mistake and try to answer, and some of our cruel or feeling children would laugh at that. Try to answer this inhuman voice because they don't even fit with the conformity to rules. How about the people who put up with, in a famous grocery store right here in the city of Boston every night, right in the heart of Boston, put up with interminably long lines to purchase small items of grocery at prices which in no way are low and prices which in no way are reduced for the 40, 50-minute wait the person has to have at the end of a day, quietly, silently, like sheep, standing in long lines in this whirling dervish of a market at the end of every day. And voices, people's voices, stuff your voice down, the automatonic way of life, the passivity, the conditioned passivity by media penetration, and by the possibilities computers and media have made for the conglomeration of persons into corporate kinds of structures where the tiny little unit is, from a human point of view, insignificant and has less and less of a voice in reality. Now your life will come and go. Even if you are a celebrity, it's all dust in the wind in this fast time. In Italy, I remember when someone passed, in tradition, a person might mourn for one whole year for that person, take time out and grieve. The world would stop to the beloved. In this world, everything comes and goes in three-quarter time. It's all dust in the wind, tissues flying in the gutter. Even if you are a celebrity, you're hot now, you pass away, you're not hot anymore, or something happens to you, you're gone. And look at the time and Colombine. Did it really stop to take inventory and grieve in the way that would just really naturally put you at a dead standstill? I'm not sure, but a lot of it seems to be a momentum to, or a desire to keep on going, in a sense, rather than just stop the world, I want to get off. And there's processing going on by grief counselors, readily forming groups and having people, quote-unquote, share their feelings and process the whole situation with efficiency, if you will. Now, the influence of TV and videos like Doom and other very deadly, dark videos are extremely profound, even to children that are integrated into units of people that surround them and relate with them on a consistent basis. And right now, the only generation, by the way, that's in is the working generation, because that's the generation that produces. The generations that really don't count so much are teens and young children and seniors who don't produce. But back to the TV and video games. Let's begin with video games. I heard a retired colonel, whose name I don't know, unfortunately, talk about his book about killing. He's also a psychologist in one of the military branches, and he said that the military uses video games just like Doom and other video games that are out there to practice, and the law enforcement uses these games as well to practice killing, because he said a civilian doesn't know how to kill or have the habit to kill until you practice, and this virtual reality gives you the exact training that promotes and enables you to actually be able to kill when you're faced with a gun, a target. It kind of even facilitates that you would kill. And the Marines have licensed the video game Doom, the same game that was very much played by one of the two perpetrators in Columbine. And it's these simulators that teach people and children how to kill. And as it was pointed out, for the video part of it, children are rewarded with the number of people they kill. The more they kill, the more they're rewarded. And for example, too, this person was explaining that this kind of way of simulated training and just making it easy and natural outflow of using a gun and having a target is so superior to, for example, having the old kind of bullseye targets. And by the way, the person who did the school shootings in Paducah, a young person as well, practiced with these simulator games, was addicted to them as well, and when he did his shooting, he made 8 shots, and all of them hit either to the head or the chest area, which is a better record than the average law enforcement person who trains with simulators. And law enforcement heads are said to be quite angry that kids are learning to have such skills. And not only that, but addicted to it and being rewarded for it, unlike what happens in the adult situations for military and law uses. Now these games have dismemberment, blood, burning, and try to make it real as possible. And then there's one that has children on skateboards shooting people, and another that has people driving cars into people and assaulting them that way. And by the way, though the so-called crime statistics are said to be down, which I leave that aside as what that is or isn't, assaults in the United States are up. And and 90 people a day in the United States are killed by a gun. So the games, these video games, are games that do harm to people simulatedly, which is very real, virtual reality. And to make this game, if you're the developer, think of how you must have to want to harm people. To advertise these games, you've got to have the feeling of wanting to harm people. These are adults we're talking about. There's ads about having warm craniums on a stick, or how after you've got everybody dead, you must devour their souls with ooze. People have to feel this. These are adults we're talking about. And one of my points in what I'm talking about tonight is how much what is handed down to the children and who these monsters are that we do not recognize comes from the world we are about. Maximum desecration, new ways to hurt, and the industries hire these people to do it. I also heard that it's somewhat less money in general to make violent video and violent movies than it is to make other kinds of media representations that are not violent. And don't forget, too, that most video games are purchased by adults, including probably some of the ones for children, and that what's fun and interesting to the children is fun and interesting to the adults. It's not just the children that want to see these movies, it's the adults. And it's the adults that like to play these games. Videos are such a great influence on children, as are computers, that you have to pull some children away. I talked with a parent who has a 7-year-old who had to go to great lengths to keep the child away from the computer and the games. The children with this programming, from computers, from the video games, from all the other things I'm talking about, become new kinds of beings, programmed beings, new biobehavioral units. What you see is what you get. You don't scratch the surface and find some dynamic underneath. You see walking, talking creations of media penetration. Also, computer. I happen to be delving quite deeply into computer recently. Fortunately, I did not do that early on, even though it's one thing one must have, unfortunately, in today's world. And I didn't favor it. But it is the world I'm in, the modern age. I'm in the future now. And I'm delving into it. And I see that the computer is a straitjacket to the mind. The computer is not a place for imagination. It's not a place for creativity or spontaneity. It's a place where thoughts and ideas and actions are routed in very certain ways, and you must train and memorize and condition your brain to a set patterned way of behaving. And computers are also wiring the children to be these people we don't understand. We say, where are the inner souls? Where's the guilt? Where's the responsibilities? Where's some kind of sense of right and wrong? We have new kinds of wirings of our children. Now let's look at the influence of movies. Blockbuster movies. Who loves them? Who pays the $117 million to see these movies? Adults. For the most part, adults. And adults are seen taking their children. And the ones that are so loved are the ones with high violence, high adventure, high action. And if you add sex to it, you can, so to speak, screw life twice as hard. Get twice the bang for your buck, so to speak. And people who are adult talk about movies. The news, there are shows that are news, and the news has parts on it that's about movies. This was never before. Shows about movies, complete infiltration into existence, complete programming, and we people at the other end of this media are of necessity passive. We're not participants in it, we're recipients of it. And the content in the movies on TV, for example, I don't go to many of the movies in the theater. I stopped that some time ago for the most part. As I say, I'm just not interested in violence. It's boring to me. And if something, you know, it really gets hairy, so to speak, it can be very uncomfortable. And why should I be looking at that? I don't want to be looking at that. But there's so many explosions are just boring, and the chases and so on. There was only one good action adventure movie that I ever saw that was real enough and true enough to contain what it did that I recall, and that was French Connection. Maybe there have been some others, but mostly it's just boring and ugly and terrible to watch. Now, the sadism is taking joy and pleasure in the pain and of inflicting pain and seeing pain in others. And sadism in the movies on TV is purposely highlighted, prolonged, exaggerated, and there are ideas in there that people could never imagine. Constantly, ideas are being drug up for new ways to be cruel, new ways to make people cringe, new ways to hurt and show that, as these video games advertise, you not only get the body, but you get the soul. You do more than kill. You want to kill after killing. There's just no limit. Let's look at some of the movies, however, that are known beyond TV, with which I have experience from flicking around to say what I've just said. Let's look at some of the movies that are more known as representations of this uselessness, useless violence. Taxi Driver, Silence of the Lamb. Silence of the Lamb was a titillator. That was not meant to show you the mind of a killer. That was meant to prolong and tear out of you and instill in you fear of perversity and fear of not quite really. I've seen documentaries on killers. Silence of the Lamb was not it. Silence of the Lamb is a commercial product. Fargo, I saw Fargo. There were parts in Fargo that were very interesting for their reflections on so-called middle-class everyday existence. Kind of unique and interesting, but when I ever saw the going out of one's way to show violence, to make sure you got it until you felt that this is very violent and violence can be done to people. And so there, Fargo. Will Smith and his great blockbuster, which I presume had so many explosions. Matrix, that I haven't seen, that people say is so violent. RoboCop, the very famous Schwarzenegger. Rambo with the famous Stallone. Fatal Attraction, trash. To have to bring that movie into those scenes of violence and make sure you see how rude and low and vulgar and wrong and mean and terrible the violence is. Carrie, the books of Stephen King, who is not that good of a writer, by the way, but is, I would grant you, a very ingenious and bright fellow. The movie Carrie has, in a way, some parallels to what went on in this high school. He is a shadow of Basketball Diaries. Really an unnecessary kind of thing for us to be imagining, and it's unlike a lot of the horror imaginary tales of the past, because they break the line between what is horror to make you imagine a kind of thing in another place and time versus making it real, making sure it sticks into your guts that this is the way the world is. And of course there are hundreds and thousands of unfamiliar titles that are on TV, and the mean world syndrome is a kind of way that we can become when this stuff is impressed in us, that the world is a mean place. Get it, sucker. Know it, live it. And we become paranoid too, because enough of this impinging us day after day after day, no matter how healthy we are, we're going to start to wonder and worry. Everything is murder, everything is killing, everything is violence. It's got to take its toll. Now, I can't turn on my TV, which is cable A, except to see guns, predation, killer mood music, unsafety, cruelty, violence magnified and extended, torture, horror, danger, mercilessness. In fact, there's a new sitcom, as an aside. I forgot the name of it. I saw a little snippet from it, and one person says to the other, all life has value in an office setting, and the other person goes, yeah, right, and they both start laughing as if, what a joke is that? So what we see on the movies, TV, and video is people taking lives and people taking what will happen to lives into their own hands, which is what the children have done, what the teenagers have done. No boundaries. We see people for whom violence is senseless or easy or a value, and to be cruel to life is a value. And let us recall one of the pioneers, Clint Eastwood, and the famous Make My Day with the automatic weapon at the head. So it's been going on a long, long time. Violence as a perfectly natural way of life. Now, where is comedy? Why isn't there comedy? Why are all the Chevy Chases and the John Candys and the Jim Carreys and Richard Pryors? Where are these persons on television, or persons like them anymore? The genuine comedians. Where are these shows, or even some of the comedic type movies that don't have famous comedians? I can't find them. I don't see them anymore. What's the purpose of the way television, for example, is programmed? And what's the purpose to repeat now, in the case of Columbine, the shootings, to stay with them, to impress the pain, to make the nation low, to make the nation see day after day how sorrowful this is, how sad this is, how horrible this is, and to dare to ask mothers whose children were just killed, how does it feel the day after? Where will you go from here? Wish you the best. Thanks for talking to us, but you got to go now. Time's up. We got what we wanted. If life had value, we wouldn't be doing this with people. We're living without meaning. We don't know the boundaries. I wouldn't dare go up to someone who suffered a loss, far less than that, and ask them, how you doing? We hope you get through it. Thanks for talking to us. I wouldn't begin to approach them, except if they fell down to try to lift them. I wouldn't utter a word. I wouldn't dare. And many of us would not dare. They know no boundaries. Our children know no boundaries. What is the agenda? What is this lunacy? And at the same time, we deny how bad this is and how screwed up we are. We don't come out and say, geez, we must be doing something wrong. We're in cultural denial. We're in cultural pathology. Instead of talking about getting on with life, thanks for talking to us, we might say something like, this is a depressant. This makes people depressed and disturbed. This is a defeat. Media programs enables and trains violence. And then the media uses the violence that really occurs for their own images and fodder for talk. They can't run fast enough to it. It's analogous to chemical companies producing chemicals that are unsuitable to physical health and then selling pharmaceuticals or procedures to patch up physical health. So they're getting the best of all worlds financially and morally, psychologically conditioning, getting into the being and state of existence of people. Violence is a commodity like Campbell's soup, like Toyota cars, and it's a corrosive commodity. It's a thing for sale. And to what end? I cannot ask that question. Enough and enough. To what end? Is it just all around making sure you know? Violence will get you. Violence is all around. Violence in your face. This is life. This is life. Believe it. This is life. If you don't believe how profound an influence television has on you, a one-way influence, think of commercials. Commercials do the trick for selling millions of units of product. And you repeat something, and it sticks in the head. And from going through the eyes and the ears into the mind, into the neural cells, it goes into those cells, travels down to your arm in the grocery store, and you pick the product up. Television is a one-way penetration into your behavior. Products that are desired to be sold are put into movies in the midst of movies. You will see these on the Seinfeld show. You will see them in movies. They'll have an Oreo cracker, and show it on the camera or talk about how it tastes. Why? Because that penetration goes into you and into your hand, and you grab it from the shelf. Your brain is a storage of memory and a state of being, what we call an affective state. It's not feeling necessarily as in, oh, I feel blue, or oh, I feel happy, but you're always in some kind of state of feeling, whatever that is. And your brain is a storage of memory together with a state of affect or sentience or sentiment of how you're feeling at the time. They go together. Thinking and affect or feeling. And the TV has a profound influence. You do not forget what you see, even if you cannot recall it to your mind. With repetition, it gets impressed. And then if it impresses you, it really gets impressed. As Marshall McLuhan said, the famous idiom that was so hard to understand but becomes more comprehensible day by day, the medium is the message. In other words, there's no message behind it. What you see, what is penetrating you, that's the message. That's the beginning and end of the message. Garbage in, garbage out, violence in, violence out. The medium is the message. And the medium of television and the internet happens to also be inherently fascinating and consuming to the human mind, to the young mind, to the child's mind. When you think of how to act, you think of how people have been acting. And since you're not sitting down, by and large, with family and friends, with significant others on a consistent basis, they're not the ones that are under your skins and are providing the cues. You're walking down streets amongst faces and bodies you never know, day after day, hundreds and thousands if you live in Boston. They're not the ones you're taking your cues from. You're taking your cues from the media images, from the celebrities, from the known actors. And even if you did know family and friends, you'd be taking your cues from the known actors. What we have in common as people, even though we're such a disparate, fractionated, separated, enclave, partitioned kind of society, and we are, with so many different agendas and groups formed around those agendas, where ne'er the twain shall meet as things stand right now. Even though we are that, and it's very hard for those who try to govern, be what they may, to govern in a time when a country is so divided. That's a very difficult thing to do. We do have in common, in spite of that, media personalities and themes. In fact, the only true common framework we have in the nation, the only true point of view, whether we don't like it, or it's our favorite, or it's neutral to us, or we hate it, these are the things we have in common. And we also have, through media, we have sports. And we are extremely absorbed in sports, pathologically absorbed in sports. And I dare say we absorb our children pathologically in sports. And by the way, let's just take a look at the behavior of adults at sporting events. I don't go to them, but I'm told it can be very violent, rude, crude, and mean-spirited, gross. Again, the context in which our children come into adulthood. I won't even say grow, because to grow, there must be nurturance. To grow, there must be ways and means of experiencing, imagining, trying, testing. But we're talking about programming. So we are the culture of pathology, and we are the legacy. Now let's also look at some facts of psychological constitution. and what we as humans and what our children as humans are constituted to do, just as being alive and human. One very big thing that children will do of necessity in being awake and alive and having sense perception, they will engage, without knowing it, in what's called observational learning. Just by observing what's around them, they will imitate. That's just the way of life. In fact, animals will even do that. More than that, they will do modeling. And they'll often do modeling around things that have come to have some meaning to them. They will try to enact their behavior instead of just unconsciously, if you will, observing and imitating without thinking about it. They will, in modeling, try to reenact the same kinds of patterns they see in things which have meaning to them, for better or for worse. So if they have favorites, and if for some reason some personalities or persons have some meaning to them, and these things behave in certain ways that are either violent or nasty or mean or antagonistic, children will model their behavior after them. If they are heroes to the children, children will model their behavior after them. We all have, and children and teens have, memory. So let's not forget that. I mentioned that already. Our memory capacity is registering everything we see and do, even if we can't put our finger on it, even if we can't recall it, and even if we're not aware of how many impressions are being stored in the brain. For example, I'll be able to tell you so much of what is around me, all these things around me, the color, the material, the height, the texture of the floor, the size of the room, the temperature, how many lights are here, who's here, what's been said. I'll be able to tell you all that. It's all going into my brain. That's my memory processing that. I'm not even trying it. Think what's going into the brain, especially when you're absorbed, especially when you're fascinated, especially when you have heroes, especially when you're a latchkey kid, especially when you feel a terrible void without realizing it, especially when you're angry and you don't know at what, especially when you have nothing else and you're the human ape. You're the human ape looking around you, taking it in. You're going to become what is being fed to you. And you're certainly not going to pay attention to those persons who would dare to have some authority over you and yet play no significant, true, day-by-day, repeat, consistent, appreciated, needful, experienced role in your life. Now, one thing that a younger person doesn't have, and unfortunately many of us older people could use more of, is judgment. But it is also a human capacity that can develop and does develop in most cases. But the child and the teenager don't have yet necessary judgment. Judgment is that part of the brain that takes all the sense impressions, that takes the feelings that go along with those sense impressions and other feelings from life, and inadvertently, in its own mechanisms and ways of congealing things together, adds judgment into the mix of what is being said, what is being done, what is being thought, what is being planned. Now, one part of judgment is a notion of causality that has to fit into the mix of judgment. Causality of how things come to be as they are, how things are before what you see, how things are after what you see, what consequences are, and so forth. Causality. This is not a capacity of children. And when children are getting these images that are wiring them to a T according to what's being programmed, they are also not, on top of all the other parts I talked about, not receiving these images and events with an ability to use judgment. So if if you combine media influence with vacuums and voids and lack of integrated experience with co-human beings that love you and are with you all the time, and you have creatures that are wide open, getting into things, having to fend for themselves on the sidewalks, in the daycares, when they're left with other people, and are never going to be able to have the genuine rapport and long-term developed, growing kind of relation that some of us may have been privileged to have, as it turns out, in this techno world that we're part of. When you take these kinds of younger persons and you put them in combination with media, you get, again, a magnified, highly potentiated effect to become what is programmed and to gravitate towards things that will satisfy the hurt, satisfy the angst, satisfy the lack of feeling of ever having gratiation or satisfaction or connection or love with fellow human beings. In fact, probably a sense that, again, according to the mean world syndrome, the world is a pretty nasty place to have to contend with. And sometimes I hear other psychologists talking on television, and some of them might contend that it's not media. Hard to believe that anyone would say that. But I have heard it, and they might talk about pathologically, again, pathologizing the damaged child, that it's the damaged child reacting. And I have to make this point, which derives from common sense, if one were to think really hard, but also from psychology, tried and true, that environment influences behavior. Environment, conditions, circumstances, contingencies are directly correlated to what response you get out of an organism, what response you get out of people. The environment is way more important than we have yet ever come to realize, but we will continue to realize it as we move into the future. Environment, conditions, behavior. And by environment, I mean media images, media diets, daycares, unsupervised existences, peer influences, anonymous kinds of processed, lockstep, automatonic high school experiences, walk along the corridors, keep moving, be brushed aside, feel alone, feel rejected. Environment influences behavior. Speed of life, stress of life. Now, much has been made about the suburban versus the urban situation, especially since the Colombine killing. The idea being that one is supposedly somewhat affluent, largely white, somewhat professional, well-established, sort of easier to live in communities. The other, not as affluent, mostly non-white, mostly non-professional, mostly not as easy to live in communities, presumably. And this distinction has been made, and it's been said that in the former situation, attention's being paid because of the different features that I outlined, and in the latter situation, attention wasn't being paid because of the features that I outlined, but that they're similar in fact. And I think one of the reasons that reasons that Columbine really got to people is that A, the number of people, but B, because of all the reasons outlined, it again disturbed the reality of people who thought that this is the kind of way life should be okay. And the reality was that life was indeed very wrong in seemingly okay circumstances. Also, the features between them are in fact not quite the same. The heartache and pain of loved ones is the same. The fact that kids can get guns is the same. The fact that guns are so prolific on the streets is the same. But in the suburbs, the kids, as in some of the music I described early on, the kids are at the end of their tether. And they're not striving for affluence, perhaps, first and foremost. They're not fighting crowding, and they're not fighting any overt, obvious dissensions and obvious dangers on the street, not obvious ones. They're fighting loneliness and despair and a lack of human connection and meaning. They're in a wasteland. I'm thinking of that song by The Who, Teenage Wasteland. They're fighting their being out there in the hinterland, hurt and wanting to inflict the pain onto others that they feel themselves. The kids in the inner city, on the other hand, are fighting crime, literally, and danger, literally, and dissension, and interpersonal conflict that is right in the surrounds about them. And they're struggling to get their hands on money, generally speaking. And they're also fighting the despair of impoverishment and the perpetual odds that they have to beat in their environment to keep on going, let alone keep on advancing. So the white, so to speak, suburban attention is turned to a kind of emptiness and void and disconnect. And that child uses guns to destroy the very culture that made this situation, that made the life that the child is living, that made the hurt and pain and the people who represent that hurt and pain. The black, so to speak, urban child is motivated to get affluence, perhaps, if at all, if motivation can even be gotten, and cars to buy and women to have, as in the music representations that are so numerous, and celebrating guns as the gangster life, so to speak, and the way to get by, and finding eventually that money alone is a false god, but yet to get to the stage to enjoy it enough to experience the angst of not caring about the deprivation that is so fundamental and practical in everyday life.
Also, at the same time,
corporations teach us that life is cheap, that life is expendable. Products reign. Nothing is sacred. The message is to buy, buy, buy. So corporations and the megalopoly way of life, under which we are all, in a sense, oppressed, truly speaking, has something to do also with the frustration, the speed of life, the way we're living, the alienation from each other, the lack of knowing each other, the lack of human communication, and the lack of human value, and the lack of value for life. Corporations, the structural system under which we are enslaved, if you will, has a lot also to do with the essence of life as we know it today. It makes life impersonal, and that's exactly what is not needed when we have conditions such as many of the ones I've mentioned already. We're dictated to to buy, and we're dictated to as to what to buy, and we go right ahead and we do it. We behave well. But it does nothing for our souls. It does nothing for the coldness of our personalities. It does nothing for the loneliness of our hearts. And again, it's also dehumanizing because we're under the umbrella and control and power and effort and desires of forces fabricating and, in a sense, masterminding or laying out the blueprint for how we're going to live, what we're going to be as people. Really not as people, as humans, but how we're going to live in as much as that we're going to be consumers and we're going to buy things, what those things are going to be, and what activities we're going to engage in that we'll pay for to give money back to the corporations. And I say about all of this, I brought in that influence, and I say about all of this with this and the latter and the many other influences I've tried to bring all together here. I say to all of this, why do we have kids in the first place? Should be a question we ask ourselves. If these are the conditions that are happening and impinging on our children, and if they're having to go through some of the malcontents and the hurts and pains and diseased, rotten feelings that they may have inside, as I explained in some of the music in the beginning, as an outcome of what this is all about, or if they have to turn into scary monsters and super freaks like David Bowie has mentioned, if they have to become beings or creatures that we don't even recognize, and if we're not going to spend the time with them, if we're not going to bring them up every step of the way, supervising them and being there for them, and in that framework giving them the rope and latitude in which they can explore and develop, if we're not going to be doing that wholeheartedly, why do we have kids, I think, is the important question we should be asking ourselves, let alone going to great extremes trying to figure out how to have kids artificially. We're not really accommodating our children, is the bottom line. And we're not accommodating our seniors. Kids and people, not only kids, are cold. They're lacking the warmth and compassion. They're lonely, they're pain, they're numb. Numbness is the worst kind of pain. You have a kind of pain that you can't feel anymore. Being unable to feel is a terrible state to be in. And there's no dynamic to it. It's a one-to-one. You are like you are numb. You are immune psychologically to the needs of love. You are immune to the problems of other human beings. You are immune to empathy. You are immune to sympathy. You are immune to what you need to get by. So many females are numb and hurting terribly. Young people have a tough time in it, tough time of it. I'm not here to cry 1,000 tears for them. I'm just trying to give a little insight and understanding that it's not as it seems to be just because there's a roof over the head, just because there's some money for college, perhaps, just because there are daycares that have been checked out or nannies that have been checked out, or just because parents in their minds think they're doing the best. It's the practice. It's the practice. It's the everyday living. And it's all these other influences. Media, media, media. Schools as institutions. Corporations as marketing, programming, marketing the life we're going to have, delivering it to us in a package, telling us, zipping it up, saying, here's your life, pal. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Dehumanization, impersonalization. Fast life, stressed life, speed of life, computer life. Think along, if you can call it thinking. Your brain is programmed to go along certain pathways. Now, kids don't care. That's the new ethic. And you can't bend over and say, why don't you care? Where's your feeling? They're already conditioned at this stage of the game. They don't care. A lot of adults don't care. We as a culture don't care. Individually, we're learning more and more to not care as a means of survival. It's not useful to care. It's often counterproductive to care. Life is too fast. Life is too hard. It's get the other person before the other person gets you. Don't let the other person get you. Don't care. Caring is stupid. Caring is dangerous. I saw a child on TV who was highlighted for having done something heroic, and even though he did such a nice thing, he was wearing a T-shirt that says, I don't trust anyone, or something to that effect. Don't trust anyone. It's dangerous to trust. It really is. Look at Dick Morris today, who was the friend of the person who's president now. He was supposedly his confidant, and what did he do? And what did the other guy do? George Stephanopoulos, who was also a confidant. They both went and blabbed, and Dick Morris in some of the most unkindly ways. The confidences that you wouldn't expose to anyone. That just don't need to be said, let alone on a national media. So we don't care, but our kids especially do not care. And they will dig their heels in on principle. They will take great punishment on principle. Have you ever seen the kids on Sally Jesse Raphael, which is a blasphemous show towards kids? It very frequently has mothers and daughters or sons, especially daughters, who use foul language and don't care, stay out late, have sex, and show no respect, so to speak. And the parent and child comes on. First, the parent gets to say how bad the child is. Then the child's brought on. The audience gets to boo the child, never having heard the child, not really knowing the parent, not knowing the background. And everybody dumps on the child, and the children will typically say, you don't know me, and they're right. We don't know them. We don't know what went down. And if you really see the parents when they get started and they really get into it, so to speak, you see the parents acting every bit as vicious as the children. The apple doesn't fall far from the tree, and yet the whole show is around, boo, look how bad these kids are, and Sally's over there. I'll get you, kid. You'll see what I'll do to you. You're not going to, we're going to coerce you into a way of behaving. Kids don't care. And you can do an awful lot to some of the ones that are very hurt and are digging their heels in on principle. You can go very far, and they will resist till the end. They won't let it dent them because they're in it for the long run. They don't care, and it's the principle that matters to them. And today, nobody wants to be a sucker. No adults want to be a sucker. That's the new chic, to not be a sucker. We even had records that used to say sucker. We used to say sucker MC, turning that around and using that expression. People don't want to be a sucker. And by the way, regarding authority, once you put the kids in daycare and you're not there for them when they need you because they're crying or someone has to take their winter coat off and they're standing there for 10 minutes with no one there to do it for them, or all the other, they fell down and no one can console them, which if you are there to console them, they don't need you, but if you're not, they really need you, and because it's really not the truly consoling person there that's available. When we're not there, when we don't have the responsibility for our kids day by day, if we're not there all the time, meaningfully, then we can't have the authority. And that's why even the 3-year-old will say no. They'll tell the parents no to everything they're saying, in effect, without realizing it. I don't accept you as my authority. To have authority over our children, to have the respect and propriety and rightfulness of that position, we first have to have the true responsibility. So we don't want to be suckers, and we have psychological warfare today, because so much, even though we're dropping bombs on people and burning them and destroying them, even though we're doing that, most of us in this country at least are fighting each other in a psychological warfare, which is the warfare of technological and future times, which are now. And the game is to not yield. That's the game. Some of us are more advanced in this game than others. And also when we're thinking of this, and from where do our children become who they are besides the media that condition them, and the unsupervised life with the media conditioning them. Think of how adults are with rage and anger. Think of road rage and how we don't want to yield, and the context in which children have legacies and are brought into legacies of anger in this world. Think of the anger of persons in pro-life, not so much that they are against abortion, which is an entirely plausible position, but the anger and hatred which can be manifest sometimes in the pro-life position, and ultimately shooting people and so on, the way you can see them take their position. So as adults, there's plenty of legacy that we are imparting to these children we don't recognize. And by the way, the children did not do what they did in Columbine, the teenagers, children really, for glory. They did not snap. They planned this very intelligently and fastidiously and intricately for a long time. And let us remember this about those children. They did not do it for glory. On that day, whatever that date was, those children woke up to die. Woke up to die. They got up and they methodically put themselves together and walked into the school and the future events to die. They walked in to die themselves, and they walked in to end the world. And they walked in to have as high a body count as possible, as video games teach people to do, with reward. And they had the plan, supposedly, to go on the street and then use a plane. So they wanted to do more than just end what was in front of them. They wanted to end the world in a way. And they're saying, I've got the pain, and so do you. I'm not going to be the only sucker taking the pain. You're going to take the pain. And I'm wired to be this kind of individual, and my mind is perverse. More so than anything I've been speaking of. My mind is pathological. My mind has gone astray. My mind has deviated for lack of rapport, most likely for lack of development and growth and nurturance in a way that would give me some balance and judgment in all likelihood. Or I've gone overboard in my addiction to deviancies that I've run rampant with. Somehow in my life there's been liberty and capacity and the wherewithal to become this way, so perverse. And I take joy in suffering, as do the video games. And people are obstacles, as they are to so many of us as we push each other around on the streets, on the subways, on the road. And I'm dehumanized, but I don't even know it. I'm this wired being, this media-influenced, cold, mean, wired automaton. And the kids don't have shame or guilt or blame. Those are old structural constitutions, and I've done other speeches on those in which I've shown that those are not necessarily good. We don't want those necessarily. We've tried to grow out of those in this century, and there's many reasons why. And I'm thinking here even of how we no longer are in shame and guilt. Thinking of Monica Lewinsky, for example, who, when asked, how about how Hillary must have felt during this whole process, Monica's answer was, well, I felt bad too. We all felt bad. How people don't own guilt today. And she's a very modern kind of personality as well, although not violent by any means, but a modern type, and in this future age. And also from many of the factors that I've described regarding her home life or lack thereof. Also, another question was asked of her, how do you feel, would you ever have done this again now that it's all come out, now that this has happened to you? And she said that she never meant for it to be public was her answer. Not that she would never do it again, but that the problem was that it got out to the public. You see, the modern mindset, guilt and shame and all that aren't part of it, and perhaps rightfully so, not for these reasons that I mentioned, and we won't go into that today. But what you see is what you get. We're not talking some inner kind of man with some deeper kinds of possibilities. Humans are objectified, they're processed, and there's a necessary de-attachment or detachment forced onto us and our children. From divorce, for example, what happens to children with detachment from divorce? Okay, so the speed of life, the lack of relation, the lack of the fact that we just don't talk with each other just for talking's sake, not when there are problems, not to be sure there's support, not to bring in the counselors, not to watch signs, not to be aware of possible pathologies or to attend to problems all the time, this pathologizing message, this pathologizing framework, but to just plain old talk. Talk all the time. Be in communication, be human. And the media penetration, all these things. And the world is not some wonderful kind of place. It's not. It's not some wonderful kind of place. The expression, life sucks and then you die, caught on like wildfire some time ago. One of these boys in Colombine had an expression on the internet, what I don't like sucks. He was perverse. He was deviant. We're not going into how that process happened, beyond all the things that I already told you, which point to looking forward to more children, and also in general looking to our children and understanding that we don't understand who they are. That boy in particular in Colombine had no perspective, no boundaries. What I don't like sucks. He projected onto all of it. If he doesn't like it, it sucks. He didn't have that judgment I was talking about. He didn't have that perspective. If you don't like it, it sucks. That's it. It's in your way. The video games, like the video games, get rid of it. No one there to supervise. No, obviously off on these tangents, developed to this point through all the influences, and get the guns themselves, the influences you've had say do it. Who knows if he even heard voices. He had a sick mind. And he had a mind that said the affliction is out there. It's not in me. That's the new. Even when it's not sick and perverse as this, the new thing is the affliction is out there. I'm not yielding. I'm not going to take whatever you're telling me. I don't accept the authority. And all the affliction is out there. It's not me. I'll think of ways to deflect it. The video mind says destroy the affliction. The movie mind says copy the satisfaction of hurting, destroying, and causing pain. And when the Columbine children did what they did, one of them looked under a desk and said, peekaboo, and shot a girl in the face. And all the while they were shooting people, they were laughing, it's reported. They took pleasure in watching their enemies, which is life itself, fall And remember Clint Eastwood holding the automatic weapon, the semi-automatic. Make my day, sucker. I add the sucker part. They mock what is cherished to add to the suffering. And that's what video games do too. They say, after you kill them, get their whole soul, put ooze over them. And they epitomized utter disregard when they asked the girl 2 times, do you believe in God? And when on the second time she said yes, one of them shot her. They did this not to, as some Christians, born-again Christians and fundamentalist Christians, so to speak, have said. I believe that's what their stance is religiously. They have said, that I think Ollie North said this too. He said they're not allowing the children to have the religion. They're killing them because they believe in God. No, remember they don't even really know causality. They're not killing because they believe in God. They're asking, do you believe in God? And making her to say yes, to sort of say, well, ask your God where he is now. This is a mean world. Maybe he's saying there is no God. Maybe he's saying, oh yeah, we'll see what God can do to help you now. You know, you believe in God, let me tell you what that means in the world that you're in. Kaboom. That's likely the way in which it was asked. Now, there were kids with these kind of paintball guns in Florida a while ago, a couple years ago. They went in their cars and videotaped hitting people with these big balls somehow, and the people would get stung like and fall to the ground. And the kids would laugh and they would love how cruel it was. They went to court and they got off with some light sentence to show you other examples of it's a mean world, and further, even kids that don't go out and kill, turning that cruelty into laughter, because the pain is so bad, you go with the pain, you go further into pain. It's part of sadism. It's part of masochism. When you can't beat them, you join them. I remember once seeing some young kids downtown. They had bundles. They had bought some things. One kid said to the other, as they entered the store, oh no, I lost my bag. I left my bag in the other store. The other kids went, he hurt, ha ha, he hurt. They turned the hurt around because it's so bad. And more than the homicides, it's the suicides in the teenagers, and it's the Prozac that we're putting our children on, and all the antidepressants that kids are having to take. That's what should be alerting us, instead of making appointments with physicians so that we can give our children antidepressants and incorporating this into our daily life. We should be alarmed at their need for them at all. Not such a pretty world. Now, there were 67 bombs
in Littleton.
We've got to ask, how do people get 67 bombs?
37 to the school, an altogether different question.
There was an intricate plan. There was a school that was highly vulnerable, wide open. Were there other people involved? There are other terrorist attacks. Oklahoma, never fully resolved. The World Trade Center, and others that don't come to my mind now. Was this a vulnerable spot? We'd have to ask ourselves a question. And how could they orchestrate 67 bombs, even a big one, in the cafeteria? To sum up everything that I've been saying to you, I'll end on the following few ideas. First of all, not so much to sum up, but to give some summary points, I will say to you, first of all, that the environment, the real things that are happening in real time, be they coming to us from video, TV, humans, the school, whatever they are, the lack of things coming to us, not coming to us, the lack of things that are not there. The environment has a profound influence on behavior. Environment has a profound influence on behavior. And the structure and psychology by which we live is one in which intentions don't count. It's the practice, it's the actions, it's the real things that are happening that count. Intentions don't count. Furthermore, what we have with us today, I'm trying to impart this to you so you don't go back to the Bible, go back to so-called family values, go back to the way things used to be, go back to the life you think you know, go back to the dynamics of inner man and pathologies and multidimensional people, creative people, imagination in people. So you don't go back, that you don't know you're in the future now, that the generation behind us, the elderly, don't understand at all. They're not out there. We're out there, we understand to some degree that the valued generation that can produce. The kids are something unlike anything we can understand. We don't know where they've been. We don't know the pain they have. We don't know how it's been to be in the experience they've been in. We don't know what it's like to be put in daycare right away, to be in this fast world, to be dropped off, to be brought home, to have your parents exhausted, to face all these things undeveloped alone, and stresses, the stresses that happen so early, and to be marketed to, and to have to keep up, and to have to decide how you're going to enroll yourself into this whole rote system of making money and staying alive. We don't know what it's like to be these new creatures. I'm trying to impart this to you. Don't judge with old tools. Don't suggest a return to the hackneyed themes that are unfit to the future now. And if you can't see it and don't understand the pain and the problems, and you must listen no matter what it is. Don't allow your kids to be in front of audiences that go boo, boo to them when they walk on stage, when nobody really knows them. Listen. If you can't see it and if you can't understand it, you haven't been and you are not constituted to these things, and you're out of these psychological realities. Time and change are moving faster than you can grasp, and the best you can do is put your ear to the ground and listen. Open up. You have no idea. My last, hopefully penetrating words to you are, what's the difference between the caskets in Belgrade and the caskets in Columbine? See you again. Thank you, and good night.
This has been part 2 of a 2-part show. Stay tuned for an addendum to this show. First, we know that there can be no substitute for the virtual and real presence of significant other adults in the life, ongoing daily experience of children. Secondly, when we look to answers for questions about what is going wrong and why are our children becoming creatures we do not recognize, we must look to ourselves, we must look to the culture we have created, the culture we control, and the culture we give to our children as the legacy in which they must endure and operate and fend. There have been persistent calls for tougher laws. The children who acted at Columbine and other criminals, to say the least of terrorists who are not unlike the psychology and affect of children who murder and vice versa, likely do not incorporate law, society, or prison into their ideas, except to want to destroy them. They likely don't feel along the lines of shame or fear of the horror of prison, the consequences of their actions, if you will. Their biggest concern is to deprive we, the enemy, the possible satisfaction of having them in our possession after an act, or to be not able now to perpetrate more. They devise plans which include intentional self-destruction or actually self-destruct in the event they otherwise will get caught. Tougher laws have no role rectifying children who murder and murder with fun and detachment. regarding statistics, crime, and the safety of our schools and country. It's been said that schools are safe and crime is decreased over the past few years. To talk this way is travesty. Children who, like terrorists, calculate, detach, murder, perform civilly as necessary, and do not stand out as brutes, do not just commit crime, and technically and literally schools are not a matter of safe as per statistics. To say schools are safe relative to statistics of where most crimes are committed is like saying if forests were to spontaneously burn or bricks were to fall out of the sky, nothing unusual or extreme would be happening. It's a misappropriation of terms. Also, child murderers are not just a matter of crime traditionally as we know and punish it. They are a matter of deviancy, derangement, detachment, perversion, and rage. An outgrowth or manifestation of parts of what we are in 1999. We must look at how children who are extensions of our culture reflect on ourselves. It's been said drugs and alcohol must be curbed to solve school problems. As described in the show, suburban malaise is not related to drugs, money from drugs, territories, and vice-related behaviors. It is anomie, vacancy, pain, and void. It is reaction formation gone wayward in a culture that idolizes brutality. It's often heard, guns don't kill, people do. When hate is out and one looks about, guns are the weapons of choice. Their availability facilitates shooting and indeed prompted the latest shooting in Georgia in May '99. Because of their technology, guns can do inordinate damage fast. People who grew up with guns and didn't shoot others with them when angry, lived rural or relatively rural lifestyles, were part of communities, and didn't learn to kill or even be urged to destroy with video games, television, and movies. In sum, let's look to ourselves. Let's think triply hard about bearing children before we get divorced, separated, consumed by activities that preclude our lives from those of our children.